Thank you very much. On behalf of the Institute of Politics, I welcome all of you and Graham and our honored guest. This is my first official act. It's very impressive. I hope you all realize that. And I am the new director of the Institute of Politics. And I want to thank my old friend Phil Sharp for his counsel and his friendship as he moves on to deeper immersion in the turbid waters of academe. He will now serve on the Senior Advisory Committee of the Institute of Politics and back into the classroom, professorially inclined, and I wish him well. Lovely gentleman. Now, hold on a minute, Graham, not just a second. One word I get to say, I mean, you know, when you're a director, you can do anything. Oh, no, that's not right. A word about our speaker, and then Graham will introduce him in the formal fashion. Our relationship is what we should be teaching in this institute. A Democrat from New Mexico and a Republican from Wyoming came to enjoy each other very much. And while I labored in the issue of immigration, the cheery issue, Bill came to see me. He said, you know, we've got things we could do. He brought a sensitivity to the debate that was truly exemplary. And the two of us drafted a comprehensive immigration bill, but it likely would not have survived the salvos lobbed at it from the far left or the far right. But it was done with mutual trust and respect. And maybe one day it will be called up from the bowels of the congressional computer and serve as a template as to how it might be done in the future and should be done if we're doing it correctly. So that was a great adventure with you, old friend, and much enjoyed. And you and Barbara are greatly admired by Ann and by me, and you are serving our country superbly. And there, Graham, I won't tell them how long we've known each other and the issues we've worked on. That will be for another day. The floor is yours.
Thank you, sir.
Indeed.
I'm here to introduce our guest speaker tonight because at the time this was being put together, the Belfer Center, which is a co-sponsor of this, was the only one that was certain to be here. We hadn't a new director of the Institute of Politics, an arrival date. But this is indeed, I think, his second day on the job. And for those of you who haven't heard, let me say how pleased the Kennedy School is that Alan Simpson has returned as the new director of the Institute of Politics. So let's give a thanks and a word of welcome to Alan Simpson. I think the theme that Alan has set is already sort of sets the terms for the remarkable person that we have an opportunity to hear tonight. And it's a great honor to welcome back to the Kennedy School for yet another forum event. I think at least his third that I've been present, and it may be fourth, the U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Bill Richardson. Ambassador Richardson is a member of the President's Cabinet. He's also a member of the National Security Council. And surprising and interestingly enough, he's the first Hispanic to serve in a foreign policy cabinet level position in the United States, but certainly not the last. Prior to becoming U.S. representative to the UN, Bill Richardson served New Mexico's 3rd Congressional District, one of the largest and most ethnically diverse in the country, where he was elected 8 times. In the Congress, he served as a member of the Resources Committee, the Commerce Committee, a member of the Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, the Helsinki Commission on Human Rights, and also chaired the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. In his spare time as a congressman, He was a diplomatic troubleshooter, where he worked successfully to free hostages and prisoners in several countries, including Burma, Cuba, Iraq, North Korea, and the Sudan. Most recently, Ambassador Richardson was dispatched by President Clinton to Central Africa, where he successfully brought together former Zairian President Mobutu and alliance leader Kabila for their first meeting. His shuttle diplomacy has thus suited him well for his new tasks at the United Nations. Before going to Congress and coming to his current position, Ambassador Richardson received his education here in the Boston community, a little further west than I would like to admit, but he graduated from Tufts and then has a master's from the Fletcher School. And we here at the Kennedy School judge ourselves to be a beneficiary in this regard, as in many others, of our neighbors in town, the Fletcher School, and we want to say a very special word of welcome to the Ambassador to the United Nations from the United States, Bill Richardson.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Graham Allison. That was overly gracious. And to Alan Simpson, one of the great legislators and characters of the U.S. Congress, Congressman Phil Sharp. When I was elected to Congress, 1982, I was a freshman in my early 30s. One of the first votes I cast was one of the very toughest, because Sharp was the chairman of the Energy Committee. And I was from New Mexico, like Simpson, a Westerner. Our position from the Easterners on natural gas was different. And I remember casting a vote against Sharp. It was like 23 to 22. Sharp didn't win that vote. And I thought that for the rest of my term, I would not even get a chair on our committee. I was wrong. For about 2 weeks, he took my chair away. But today, I think having somebody like Phil Sharp here, and just the Institute of Politics, Graham Allison, Joe Nye, you have half the Clinton administration first term here. Maybe there's hope for me when I get fired. But I truly enjoy these forums. You know, when I was a congressman and I addressed you before, I winged it. I spoke from, well, I'm going to speak from the heart too, but I spoke the way I used to, this way you do as a politician on the stump. Today, I want to convey a message. I want to talk about the United Nations. I want to talk about Iraq. I want to talk about American leadership. So the text, which will be about 14 minutes, will then end, and the real substance of a Kennedy School Forum, a Q&A, will happen. I want to once again thank you for inviting me. To all my former New Mexico constituents, I know some are here. I miss you. To my Fletcher School cheering squad, thanks for showing up. I want the easy questions from you guys. You know, Secretary of State Christopher made his last speech here as Secretary of State. And in that message, he said, America must sustain our leadership and back it up with sufficient resources. Regrettably, there are those in this Congress who are not heeding his call. Our leadership as a country, America's international leadership, cannot be performed on the cheap. But Congress is asking me, as the American ambassador to the UN, to do just that. Today, at the United Nations, America is a debtor nation. We owe $1 billion. It's a fact that I'm often reminded of by my colleague ambassadors at the United Nations. And as I seek to advance America's interests on Iraq or other foreign policy issues affecting our country. If we are going to become and remain America, the world's indispensable nation, this unacceptable situation has to be rectified. This evening, as I said, I wanted to talk to you about the critical role of the United Nations in furthering America's national interests. Is that Dean Epps? It's an honor to have you. Thank you. And the need for the United States to finally pay our outstanding dues to the organization. Right at this moment, a crucial issue to America's security is being fought at the UN, and that is Iraq. Our interests are intertwined with the UN inspection team that is doing its work there, and our policy with our Security Council allies. Let me give you a brief update on the situation in Iraq. Currently, the Clinton administration's policy is moving forward on two critical fronts, diplomatic and humanitarian. Diplomatically, the United States, along with our allies in the Security Council, remains steadfast in our determination that Iraq's continued efforts to defy the international community is not going to be tolerated. We have had four Security Council resolutions passed unanimously: France, the United States, Russia, China, Britain, and 10 other permanent members representing the entire scope of the world, sending unmistakable messages, additional sanctions, that there should be full, unconditional access to all sites where we suspect, and the international community suspects, there are weapons of mass destruction. Today, more than ever, the United States remains committed to what has been a difficult but consistent and largely successful effort over the past 6 years, and that is containing Saddam Hussein. Through strong support for UN inspectors and tough international sanctions, we're ensuring that Iraq's ability to threaten its neighbors is minimized and that its weapons of mass destruction are dismantled. Because after nearly 2 decades of brutal rule, after using poison gas against his own people, after launching 2 major wars, after raining Scud missiles down on innocent civilians in Israel and Saudi Arabia, after blatantly choreographing the misery of the Iraqi people, Saddam Hussein is in no position to put demands or set conditions. Iraq's latest attempt, which you read about in the papers on a daily basis, to intimidate and prevent UN inspectors from doing their job, is only re-intensifying the view of the UN Security Council that UN inspection teams, regardless of nationality, must have full, immediate, and unfettered access to all sites that they seek to inspect. Last week, the Iraqis said it's just Brits and Americans, when the team itself had 17 nationalities. And the Security Council is once again sending an unequivocal and united message to Iraq: comply with UN Security Council resolutions and the will of the international community. Today, regrettably, the UN is a victim of its own success. There can be little doubt, in my view, that the present crisis traces its roots to the fact that UN inspectors were on the verge of discovering further examples of Iraqi obstruction, delay, and deception, because they were about to discover perhaps something that the Iraqis wanted hidden. To those who argue that Saddam Hussein has been quite successful, and there are those that say Saddam has won, I couldn't agree more. Successful, that is, in further isolating his nation as a global pariah and ensuring that the international sanctions arrayed against him will remain in place for the foreseeable future. Let there be no doubt the United States is strongly committed to finding a diplomatic solution to the crisis. That's how we want to resolve it, through the international community, through the United Nations, with our allies. However, we refuse to rule out any option, including the use of military force. On the humanitarian front, our efforts to ensure that the Iraqi people receive the food and medicine they need, despite the intransigence of the Iraqi government, continues unabated. The international community has never sought to punish the Iraqi people for the sins of their leaders. That's why UN Security Council resolutions against Iraq are clear, and I want to repeat this, clear in exempting food and medicine from any international sanctions. Food and medicine can come in. That's also why the international community, led by the United States and Great Britain, created an exception to the economic embargo by allowing Iraq to sell oil to pay for essential humanitarian assistance. It's called the Oil for Food Program, 986. For 6 years, while his people suffered, Saddam Hussein refused to take our offer. Instead of feeding his children and an impoverished people, he spent at least $2 billion on new lavish palaces for himself and his cronies. And last year, after Iraq finally let the Oil for Food program go forward, more than 3 million tons of food were delivered, and 95% of all contracts submitted under the program were approved, including virtually all food and medicine contracts. 96%. All food and medicine contracts were approved. In fact, as publicly staged funerals of Iraqi children are being held in the streets of Baghdad, Iraq continues to hoard and stockpile food and medicine for use by its military and supporters, while drastically reducing its own humanitarian assistance programs. The result today is that the Iraqi people rely almost entirely on the United Nations for food and medicine. And we have to make that program work better to improve its delivery system. And over the last 6.5 years, the Iraqi government has demonstrated a far greater willingness to continue building chemical, biological, and nuclear weapons than to feeding its own people. This data by the UN inspection team, not by the United States. Indeed, as Iraq has foregone more than $100 billion in oil revenue simply to maintain its weapons of mass destruction program, developing mustard gas, anthrax, or VX, none of which ever fed one hungry child. But for the Iraqi regime, they seem to be awfully important. Nonetheless, the United States, along with our allies in the UN, remain committed to providing Iraq with humanitarian relief. In particular, we right now look forward to Secretary General Kofi Annan's annual report on ways to improve the effectiveness of the Oil for Food program so it better serves the needs of the Iraqi people. And at the end of January, he will submit a new plan. And we are ready to take a very serious look at it to make sure it works better. Our vigilance against Iraq's provocative behavior should not waver. The grave threat that weapons of mass destruction pose, as well as Saddam Hussein's past inclination to use them against soldiers and civilians alike, preclude any compromise or weakness. As Richard Butler, the head of the UN inspection team, prepares to travel to Baghdad right at this very moment, it's my sincere hope that Saddam Hussein finally heeds the unambiguous and resolute message of the international community that full unfettered access by UN inspectors to all sensitive sites in Iraq is non-negotiable. Only then will this situation be resolved. The events of the last few months should bring home to the American people something that many of us are unsuccessful in doing, and that is to demonstrate to the American people that the United Nations is essential to America's interests and to our values. So whenever I go around the country, and I'll be in 2 states tomorrow, my message is the UN is good for America. Let's support the UN. Let's pay our debts. Since the Gulf War, the United Nations sanctions on Iraq have helped guarantee that Saddam Hussein is unable to significantly rebuild his military arsenal. The UN inspection team has destroyed 53,000 total chemical weapons in the last 6 years. This is a UN agency. And when we negotiated with North Korea, it was the threat of UN sanctions that brought them to the negotiating table on a nuclear freeze program, was the UN. Why is the UN important to America's interests? First, the United Nations and other international organizations are helping to guarantee international peace and stability from the Middle East to Macedonia. More than 30,000 international peacekeepers are helping to keep the peace. But after the fighting has stopped, it is the UN that stays behind, monitoring elections, rebuilding civil society, disarming former rebels, punishing the guilty, and the list goes on. Since 1945, the UN has successfully involved itself in over 140 conflicts. What do I mean by that? I mean that a UN presence, a rapporteur, a peacekeeping force, a UN truce, a UN political framework has brought a situation far better than before in 140 cases. Secondly, at a time when infectious diseases, many with no known cure, can spread unimpeded and undetected across national borders, the efforts of the UN's World Health Organization, the WHO, are helping to protect the lives of millions. Today, we may believe that the Ebola virus or a new strain of influenza are somebody else's problem. But tomorrow, when a person infected with any of these diseases boards a plane and touches down in Boston or in Detroit or Los Angeles, in a matter of hours, those seemingly faraway problems can quickly and tragically become our own. The UN is helping ensure that they never do. Thirdly, through sustainable development, programs from economic development and environmental protection to the empowerment of women, the UN is active and effective in these areas. Pick up the New York Times last Sunday and see about a tragic that nobody except the UN is doing something about. The sale of prostitution of women from Ukraine and Russia through Russian mafia to nations in Europe. Sexual abuse of children. Sexual sale of women. The UN is working on these programs and problems, and all of us have that responsibility. The UN is saving lives. Today, the UN High Commissioner on Refugees, something that does not get front-page headlines, is providing assistance to more than 25 million people around the world. And UNICEF is saving the lives of 3 million children every year through its vaccine program. And it was the UN that discovered the cure of smallpox. And why does that impact you as an American taxpayer? Because it saves you $250 million in research in immunization costs each year. A UN program. In addition, this year, as we celebrate the 50th anniversary of the UN Declaration of Human Rights, we're reminded that one of the UN's greatest contributions is ensuring human rights and respect around the globe. This is why, in a nutshell, I think the UN is important. If you look at what is going to challenge us as a nation in the future, the days when it's going to be Russia and the Warsaw Pact and NATO versus each other is over. The problems affecting us and the world are transnational. They're movements, some of which we don't understand. Nuclear proliferation, ethnic tensions, tribal warfare, regional fights based on ethnicity, environmental degradation, international terrorism, international drug cartels, the plight of women around the world. When you decide how you're going to deal with these problems, the answer is together with other nations. And if we can have joint strategies with other nations, you as taxpayers will save your money by getting a united front at the United Nations, and we can all fight these problems together. And the UN is a forum for these kind of challenges that America will have. The UN is only one of our tools for our foreign policy. It's not the maximum tool. Many times we will act unilaterally. Other times we will act through regional organization. But it's a valuable tool But when I go to the UN and I say this is important to America and this must we do, and we owe $1 billion, and it's because we say the UN isn't reforming itself, when in the last year the UN under Kofi Annan has cut its staff by 10%, has been more lean and more efficient, has consolidated programs, has streamlined, then America's interests are hurt there. So I ask you as Kennedy School students and internationalists, and a very active opinion leader faculty here, I'm asking for your help as your ambassador to the UN, because our interests are being hurt by not paying these dues. Republicans and Democrats and the leadership came up with a plan, which in the end looked like it was going to pass. But then the abortion issue came in, got linked to the UN bill, and the bill died. We are facing enormous challenges at the UN, and if we keep delaying and not paying our bills and dealing with these issues that I've linked together, Iraq and the UN, our interests will be hurt. 16 minutes, and I'm honored to be here, and I'm ready to take your questions.
Let me explain to you the ground rules. Line up at the microphones, both on the ground floor and on the floor above. Please identify yourself and then put your question. And questions are brief. There'll be an opportunity for additional speeches, but that'll be after this event closes, okay? And over here, if there's a Fletcher student who would like to ask a question, please get in line first, because it seems to me we've got so many Fletcher people, you should be welcome. In fact, are you a Fletcher student?
Oh, yeah.
So we're starting with you, and we're welcoming the Fletcher crowd.
Thank you. We were glad to support the MTA to come down and support the Kennedy School this evening. I am a Fletcher student. I was wondering, you spoke a little bit about...
Identify yourself, please.
My name is Alexander Thier. You spoke a little bit about 986, and I have two questions for you. The first is, at the end of this year, certainly during this past year, there's been a lot of talk from your office about problems with the way the UN has monitored the aid going into the south and center of the country. And I'm wondering, at the end of the year, with the changes that have been made, what your current impression is of the delivery and the UN's effectiveness in monitoring the assistance. And the second question is about the reported increase that apparently the State Department spokesman got into a little trouble for. We read about that in the Sunday Times, about whether, in fact, the U.S. is going to agree to an increase to the $2 billion, and if so, how much, and why or why not?
This is pretty tough questions, Graham, right?
Fletcher students are pretty good, yeah.
First, the UN at the end of this month, in fact, I think they told us January 30th, appearing before the Security Council, the UN 986 people are coming and saying, this is what we assess the program to be. We are recommending, and we expect that they'll recommend a modest expansion of the oil sales. Number two, they are going to talk about some problems with the program that you talked about in the south and central part of Iraq. It is America's view that the UN needs to get more engaged in administering the program, that the government of Iraq has too much say in the program and thus is preventing its effective dissemination to the Iraqi people. We are ready to look at improving a delivery system, the efficiency of the program, and on the increase, we're ready to take a serious look at a modest expansion if it means a better administration of the program. We don't have a quarrel with the Iraqi people. We don't. Food and medicine, we want to see it go through. Our quarrel is with the government. And what Iraq has tried to do is say this is a fight between the U.S. and Iraq. Iraq is defying the international community. So that's our answer. What I'm saying is we're prepared to take a serious look at considering the expansion. I'm a diplomat now. A year ago, I would have said the same thing a little clearer. But I hope you.
I think a remarkably clear speech for a diplomat and a remarkably clear answer. Though he is learning to speak diplomatese. I guess that was not his character as a congressman. Here again, please identify yourself.
Hi, I'm Clarissa Perez Armendariz, and I'm a second-year student here at the Kennedy School. I appreciate your interest in resolving problems through international fora, and I'm interested in why the U.S. hasn't taken a stronger stance in supporting the strengthening the Biological Weapons Convention through international organizations, if that is indeed such a good forum to do that through. And then my other question is, with the Iraq question, if the use of force does become the option that we use, what kinds of options or what kinds of strategies is the U.S. and the international community thinking of in terms of how to deal with the post-war scene there, post-Saddam Hussein scene, and particularly with relations with Iran? I just want to know your opinion.
First, on the Biological Weapons Convention, we are committed to support it, but as Senator Simpson will tell you, we have a lot of conventions that have to be ratified by the U.S. Senate. And we have a number of non-proliferation treaties, chemical weapons treaties. I have one at the UN, the Convention on the Child. It's a question of overload, and Senator Simpson will tell you, if you give too many issues to the U.S. Senate, they could tie you up in knots. But we are committed to its passage, and we will make renewed efforts. Let me talk about the use of military force. This is a decision the President has not made. It's premature. Our forces are in the Gulf. We want to resolve this issue diplomatically through the UN Security Council, through our allies. And despite what everybody says, Russia and China and the US, we work closely together. There are some tactical differences. There are some different approaches. But on the fundamental issues of access to the weapon sites, that Iraq must comply with UN Security Council resolutions, we've been together. Also on the issue of sanctions, that unless those conditions are met, sanctions not be lifted. Let me talk a little bit about post-Persian Gulf regional political situation. We've had a policy of dual containment. Contain Iraq and contain Iran. Both that are not similar cases, but with Iran we've been concerned about their lack of support for the Middle East peace process, their dissemination and sale of weapons of mass destruction, as they've been doing. We've been concerned about their support for terrorism. We were pleased to hear that the new president talked about regret on the hostages. We were pleased to hear a different tone. We're hopeful that that might lead to a government-to-government dialogue. The Iranians want a people-to-people dialogue. Universities, students, that may be good, but I think we have to discuss our fundamental differences that we talked about. We favor a government-to-government dialogue. There's also another issue here, and that the president of Iran is talking, and you hear other messages from the clerics, the religious clerics that have higher responsibilities there. So we were pleased by that statement by the president of Iran. Obviously, the geopolitical composition of the Gulf would change dramatically if the government of Iran starts engaging with the West on a strong basis and with the United States.
The question was an excellent one, but we have many people that would like to ask questions, so hereafter only one question per customer, and we're up here on the left balcony.
Hi, I'd like to ask a question specifically about the U.S. Security Council allies, specifically Russia and France. Today, according to CNN, as the UN inspection team left Iraq, the U.S. refused offers by Russia and France to add inspectors of their own to the inspection team to make it more diversified, and also refused offers by the Russian Defense Ministry to provide aircraft to help in the overflying of the no-fly zone in Iraq. And my question is, in light of the present cool relations between the U.S. and Russia over the expansion of NATO, and the cool relations also between the U.S. and France over the continued exclusion of Europeans from the command status of NATO, why would the U.S. want to refuse such cooperation when to accept it might possibly improve relations with these two nations and maybe improve the situation in Iraq as well?
That must be a Fletcher student, too.
Oh, I forgot to identify. My name is Dan Epstein. I'm actually an undergraduate here.
It's a very good question. Oh, really, that's very good. You're going to be another Sam Donaldson. I mean it in a positive way. He's from New Mexico. Did you know that? How many of you knew that? None of you. Here's the issue, and you can't link everything. We have a lot of interest with these two key countries. We consider both key allies. We have had tactical differences with Russia and France, but the result has been, however, votes in the Security Council, 4 of them, where we've been totally together. Here's our view on the specific issue that you asked. UNSCOM inspectors, UN inspectors, we think that's a UN decision based on technical competence, on science, on experience. There should not be a quota system. Now, 17% of the total UN inspections are Americans, and British is below that. Countries that are English-speaking generally have the larger percentage of people there. But there's close to over 40 nationalities. Where's Calvin? What is it, over 40 nationalities represented in the inspection team. And our position, America's position, is you don't make deals. All of a sudden, what if those that they want to put on are not technically competent and they're somebody that has a political agenda? So what we have said is let the head of the UN inspection team, Butler, an Australian, pick and choose the people that he wants. The Iraqis shouldn't pick and choose. The Iraqis say all the Americans and all the Brits are biased. That's not the case. They're all technical people, and they're looking for weapons of mass destruction. And when they get close, and this could be a German the other day, or an Uruguayan, they get too close to a site that they suspect, the Iraqis all of a sudden declare it a presidential site. So we're not rebuffing every way to resolve the crisis. We're simply saying, let's not have quotas, Security Council members, have people on the UN inspection team. That's 5 countries. Why should we just have the juice there? What about a Sierra Leone scientist? What about an Uruguayan scientist? Why should it be just the permanent 5? Russia, China, the US? Are we the only ones that have scientific knowledge? So we think that these should be decisions on expanding the UN inspection team based on science. Let the UN make those decisions. If they pick a Russian or Chinese, as they've been doing recently, fine. But let's not just to go to the Iraqis and say, okay, you've won. We're going to diversify. We're going to next kick the Americans out. We're not going to go along with that.
Up here in the balcony to the right.
Hello, Ambassador Richardson. My name is Kevin Donahue, and I'm a first-year student at the Kennedy School here. And my question is, historically, Saddam Hussein has never conceded any major point without the use of force or the threat of force. What makes you think that economic sanctions alone, not buttressed by the use of force, will enable the United States to achieve our ultimate goal of eradicating his weapons of mass destruction and seeing him removed from power?
I addressed this in my speech. The view was because Saddam has been taking these actions, he's actually won. And the media likes to say it. Yesterday, I just went crazy. One of the major networks, Saddam Hussein has scored another victory. The UN inspection team headed by Scott Ritter, the American, is leaving. He's leaving because his tour ended. And another group of inspectors was coming in. My point here, and I'm not saying that your question was sharpened by ABC, but my point is that look at where we are now. Saddam started this crisis in late October. How can he be better off now? Number one, you mentioned the sanctions issue. There's hardly any prospect that sanctions are going to be lifted now. We'll veto it based on his record on the UN inspection team. Number two, the whole world knows that these are weapons of mass destruction, that it's VX and anthrax, killer weapons. And some of these reports of research on humans, I don't know if they're the case. I haven't seen it. But if that's the case, that's horrendous. The answer is let there be access to the UN inspectors to see if this is the case. He's more of an international pariah. His support from France and Russia that maybe he had earlier on at a different approach on sanctions, it has waned within the Security Council. 4 consecutive unanimous votes in the UN. And in addition to that, if you look at his support in the Arab world, I mean, there's some discussion that he has it. Believe me, I've traveled that region. I don't think there's much there. And what we are looking at right now is the United States and Great Britain and the UN Security Council acting with the backing of UN Security Council resolutions as we try to resolve this crisis.
Here to this.
My name is James Williamson. I met you when you spoke here about Burma a year or so ago. Shortly before you were appointed to your present position, you gave an interview where you said there were 2 issues that you hoped you would be able to continue working on. One was Daw Aung Suu Kyi, who remains under house arrest in Burma, and Lori Berenson, who is a young American woman who was sentenced to life in prison by a secret military so-called court in Peru and has been in a harsh maximum security prison for over 2 years. She was a student at MIT. She happened to live right around the corner from where I live here in Cambridge. And I feel it's time. She's suffered for over 2 years. She had no opportunity to defend herself against the charges. She has asserted her innocence of the allegedly being the leader of a terrorist conspiracy. She had no trial. I feel it's time for our government to do more to, now finally get her out of that situation. So could you, you did express an interest, and I think you genuinely care about her situation.
First, on Burma. You know, when Simpson will tell you this, Sharp will tell you this, although you two have never served in the executive branch. I think, Graham, I think you did do some work in the Congress, so you may know what I'm talking about. And this is off the record if this is ever possible. But when when you're in the Congress, you have a hell of a lot of freedom. I love this job, but one of the things that you don't have is the ability to get on a plane and go to Burma or go to Peru, as I did on both cases, to try to deal with this issue. On Burma, I hope that I'll get a chance to engage more in it. I'm proud to tell you that I was very active in the debates within the President's foreign policy team that imposed sanctions on Burma, something that, by the way, started in a movement here in Massachusetts. I think in the legislature, I had some Harvard students here. And after I came and I saw that grassroots people cared about this, I thought that we could get some support because the Congress didn't pass the sanctions. It was done by the administration. Are things better in Burma right now? Maybe very little better. Is she better off? I stay in touch with her. We're supporting her. We're trying to find ways that we can make it easier for her to get the backing of the people, an election there. We need to engage more there, but it's tough when we're hanging out there alone with the rest of the Asian countries against our policy. But I will get engaged more in that. The second issue, Lori Berenson. I went to Peru right before I was named to this job, and I talked to the president of Peru. And what I said was, look, she should have a fair judicial trial. She was tried by a military court, a bunch of people in hoods. There should be due process. That's all I'm asking. Then they had that siege of the embassy. So I think her case was put on the back burner. We want to do more in that. But to be honest with you, I haven't been able to get involved in that because of my responsibilities at the UN. But I'm in touch with Berenson's parents, who I became close to. When you get involved in a lot of rescue and hostage attempts, you build a symbiotic relationship with the people you rescue and their families. And I felt I did that with her parents. Tell them I'll try to do more, but I haven't done much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. In fact, I think it's a reflection of the character of the person whom we as Americans have the good fortune to have serving as a UN ambassador now, that before, when it was not part of his business, and it certainly wasn't part of his constituency, he took a very specific interest in people a large number of whom he managed just by dint of persistence and persuasiveness to have their situations improved, and many actually to be gotten out of jail. So that's one of the things that it's not a normal practice for members of Congress, but certainly was for Bill Richardson. We're back here at the left.
Hello, my name is Archana Jaiswal. I'm a student at the Kennedy School of Government. My area is poor children and strengthening democratic systems and institutions to serve those most vulnerable and needy. I've been working with Aboriginal children on Indian reservations in North America. My question is, where is the place for these children? Where can their voices be heard in the UN system and in the American democratic system, particularly those children who do not see the use of force as a solution to conflict, who are still interested in the spiritual traditions of nonviolence?
You know, when I was a congressman, 20% of my constituents were Native Americans. Simpson had, what did you have, 20% maybe? About 10? Sharp, I don't think you've ever met a Native in Michigan. Anyway, huh? Now, this is a serious issue. My point is that I was deeply involved in the problems of Native Americans. And I'm proud that some of the bills that I passed, self-determination, Indian Religious Act, many that I consider very important. We're trying to find at the UN a forum for indigenous people. What we need to do is indigenous people need to work with other indigenous people around the world. They don't do that right now. They've all got separate agendas. There needs to be almost a conference where they all come together and say, from the UN, this is what we need. And that isn't happening. And we as a major power can't do it all. We are trying through my own mission to commit more to economic and social programs, human rights, refugees. You know how I'm doing that? I'm trying. Women don't play a big role in foreign policy, and minorities don't either. And I want to see more, and I think the Kennedy School can be a big player here in educating our people from the women and minority communities. I did something. My ambassador for human rights and for children's programs, it's an ambassador, the number 2 position, is an African-American woman, Betty King. My ambassador for peacekeeping, for security, for weapons, for conventions, is a woman too, Nancy Soderberg, Ambassador Nancy Soderberg. My point here is that I think women, and I'm not trying to shift the question, some of you here in the international arena need to be more active and involved in foreign policy, and the elite community that in the past has controlled foreign policy needs to open up to address some of the issues that you're talking about that are not being addressed, and I admit it.
We're back here on the left balcony.
Good evening, Ambassador. My name is Simon Holden. I'm a student at the Kennedy School. Do you agree with the formation of a United Nations Standing Army? If so, how would you define their rules of engagement?
I don't agree with that. The United States doesn't agree with that. I don't think that concept has much support. I believe that the best way to deal with conflicts is through the current peacekeeping operations the UN has, where new guidelines are being set for peacekeeping operations. How much is it going to cost? What is the purpose? What is the exit strategy? What is command and control? What you're seeing more, though, is not necessarily a UN standing force, but you are seeing indigenous forces from various regions banding together and forming peacekeeping forces. Let me be specific. When I go to the UN Security Council every morning to discuss peace and security issues, 65% of the time are spent on Africa, problems in Africa. that deal with peacekeeping and other issues. The Africans right now are forming what is called the Africa Crisis Response Force. African troops to respond to humanitarian and political and peacekeeping disasters, recruiting among 5 member states within Africa for that force, trained and funded by some donor countries like the United States. I think you're seeing more of that. A UN standing army would engender, at least in our political society in the United States, a lot of opposition. Because one of the things when I try to sell the UN with the American people, they're saying, you know, world government, a bunch of black helicopters, a UN army. And they say, here you're designating, you know, the UN designating one of my rivers in Taos, New Mexico as a heritage site. I was really proud of that. But I had constituents say, that means the UN's going to take it over. So it's also a political call. But I think the UN, with its existing peacekeeping new agenda, and with indigenous forces like this African Crisis Response Force, is working better than what you mentioned.
Thank you.
Okay. The right-hand balcony.
Hi, my name's Greg McCartan. I don't go to school here. I'm a worker, a garment worker in a American sweatshop. And I found it significant that you began your presentation stating from President Clinton's inaugural address, I believe, that America is the world's one indispensable nation, and believe that the course towards Iraq and other countries in the world is bearing that out. I think if you put yourself in the shoes of someone in another nation and were told that I am the only indispensable nation, you would begin to get a little worried. Now, on a daily basis for the last number of days, President Clinton, Defense Secretary Cohen, and yourself have repeatedly stated that the U.S. is ready, willing, and able to use military force in this confrontation, despite talk of wanting diplomatic action. In early November, when there was a kind of a bad time for U.S. policy in this region, the New York Times subsequently documented that the Clinton administration was actually building up a massive, not just a bombardment, but a massive military retaliation against Iraq to try to do what Bush couldn't do in replacing Saddam Hussein. I believe that that is the course that the administration is on, that is being deliberately provoked through the use of this inspection team in Iraq and an attempt to deepen the denial of the Iraqi people's sovereignty. I noticed in your speech you expressed quite a bit of sympathy for the Iraqi people and tried to cover up, actually, the devastating consequences of the U.S. sanctions, which is interesting because you must be feeling a lot of heat around that. I'll just...
Let me ask you to get
sure,
to the question.
yeah. I'm putting this because I'm the lone voice so far that's trying to raise a different perspective than Mr. Richardson has, and it's in a form you can respond however you see appropriate. But the truth is, it is the sanctions and the war that have brought devastating consequences in the hundreds of thousands of lives of Iraqi people. I believe it should be immediately lifted. And finally, anyone who would like to participate in a protest against these policies can do so at the federal building on Tuesday at 5 o'clock. Thank you.
Well, look, I respect your views. I totally disagree. Now, here's why. I said early on, the sanctions don't cover food and medicine. The Iraqi government, instead of spending money on its people, spends it on weapons, on hiding weapons, and on building a military arsenal. And if you watch CNN, which everybody seems to do these days, you will see these palaces that are purchased by something. Now, secondly, we have not used military force. In fact, we are being criticized right now by many pundits, by many in Congress starting now, although generally we've had a lot of congressional support. You know, what are you waiting for? Well, what we're waiting for is a peaceful solution. We want to resolve this problem diplomatically, through international law. We've been trying, through the United Nations, using our arsenals of diplomacy. There have been special envoys sent. There's been Security Council resolutions. Right now, Ambassador Butler is going to go to Iraq and try to resolve and diffuse this crisis. That's how we want to resolve it. But if you have a continued presence of mass destruction, of weapons, if you can see continued defiance from somebody who has gassed his own people, he's gassed the Kurds, he's gassed the Iranians, he murders his own family. I mean, some say that we try to demonize him, but those are facts. Those are not things that I have invented. Then I believe that we've exercised due patience. But that patience is wearing thin.
My name is Bill Wasserman. I'm a retired journalist. I'm wondering, Ambassador, you had a unique window on affairs in Zaire. I wonder if I could elicit your opinions about the state of that country and what might happen in the future. Thank you.
I know you from somewhere, don't I? Where?
Well, I'm a retired political worker, too. A
Yeah.
corner in New Mexico in the Dukakis campaign.
Yeah,
and on
that's
your
right.
truck going through Santa Fe. But
That's right. You know,
Welcome to Cambridge, yes.
when I was in the Congress, I was the last month of the Dukakis campaign. And be generous. There are a lot of Dukakis people. I mean, Allison helped, I remember. Chucky Campion is here, the best political consultant in Boston. And some of you guys here are thinking, where are you, Chucky? Are you here? He's left. You're fired. Zaire, the Congo. It's now called the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Things are better under Kabila than Mobutu, not much better. We've got a serious situation. I was involved in getting the UN to investigate some of the massacres there. That's happening. There needs to be more respect for human rights there. There's little. But the issue is, what do you do? Do you cut this new guy off, Kabila, and say, we're not going to help you? Or do you try to engage him and say, look, we'll help you, but there's certain things that are important to us? Human rights, elections, civil society, judicial systems. That's what we're trying to push him in. It's working in some cases, it's not in the other. But we've elected to engage rather than isolate and rather than cut off aid. Zaire is the third biggest country in Africa. We should pay more attention as a nation to Africa. Human misery, refugees, massacres, AIDS. I mean, some of the real problems affecting our not just interests, but our planet are there. And we need to learn more about Africa. We need to commit more resources there. President's going to go there soon. We need to pay more of that attention. But that's what we're doing in the Congo. It's not and I saw both. I had the job of telling Mobutu, Mr. Mobutu, you've been a leader. You've been a friend of the United States. It's time to go. That was my message to him. You know, I was sweating a little bit. I didn't have the problem with the first two, but the third. And the reality there was to say, look, this country's changing. We want a peaceful solution. And then I was to go to Kabila and say, you know, if you want our help, you got to clean up your act. And it's up to you. And he sort of engaged me. We sort of connected a little bit. I gave him a New York Yankees hat. He said that I called him a Bushman. You know, there was a little bit of negotiating tension. But in the end, the massacre investigations are taking place. The donors are meeting about helping the Congo. His cabinet is a little better, but there's still a lot of problems. And we don't have all the answers. And this is where the international community, France, the Organization of African Union, and Africans themselves. And there are some good things happening in Africa. There are some market economies emerging, some elections taking place, new generation of leaders there, Museveni. Some of them are not the world's most ardent Democrats, but still, it's a part of the world we cannot neglect.
We're coming close to the end, so let me urge you brief questions, please, and we're here at the left microphone.
Good evening, Ambassador. My name is Gautam Mukunda. I'm a freshman at Harvard College, so I guess in terms of age, you've hit bottom. We have recently begun to learn the extent of the ex-Soviet biological weapons program, to return to that topic briefly, and the possibility that Soviet scientists are aiding Iraq, Iran, and other powers around the world. I'm wondering if you see any way the United States can deal with the problem of the Soviet leakage of science and technology in these projects, in biological weapons in particular, to countries around the world.
You know, here's the preeminent expert on that, on loose nukes. Really? Did you know that? No, really. I mean, not just when he was in the...
Shows what trouble we're in.
No. Not just when he was at the Pentagon, but some of the stuff he's written. So you answer the question. No. But look, the whole issue of the former Soviet Union, the issue of making sure their scientists don't sell their expertise when they're making $30 a month, issues relating to exports of some of their technology, safety of nuclear and biological weapons. And when I was in New Mexico, Los Alamos Laboratories, I represented all the scientists in New Mexico. In fact, I'm not trying to not answer your question. I'm saying we need to develop a better policy. But when I was representing Los Alamos, New Mexico, they have more PhDs per capita than any community in the country. Out of 19,000 people, 8,000 of those human beings were PhDs. This community, Los Alamos, New Mexico, was so smart, never voted for me. Answer that question.
I think the ambassador's point is right on. That is that you have in Russia today, Arzma-16 or Chelyabinsk, or in the biological weapons area, 4 or 5 different facilities, in many of which there are thousands of PhDs, each able to do things that have quite catastrophic consequences in terms of nuclear weapons or biological weapons or chemical weapons, and who are living in very desperate circumstances. I've got another speech that I'll give you, or if you chat after, on what specific things we should be doing, but it's a whole lot more than what the U.S. government or other governments are currently doing. We're up here in the left balcony.
Hi, I'm Sam Sternin. I'm also a freshman at Harvard College. You stressed several times during your speech that you thought it was important for countries to respect the world community's views. For example, when the world community passes resolutions, that those should be followed, even if it might seem that the country would not want to do this. I could think, since we're also on the topic of sanctions, there's a certain country which the United Nations has passed numerous resolutions for over the past 10, 15 years condemning an embargo on that country, and that's Cuba. And the United States continues, nonetheless, not to follow world opinion in this area. So I'd like to hear your views on that, please. Thank you.
Right now, something very far-reaching is about to happen, and that is the Pope is going to Cuba. I believe it's this week. Why is that important? I think because the symbol of the Pope going to Cuba is a symbol of human rights and democracy. And President Clinton just recently said it about Cuba. We are ready to have reciprocity and look at a new relationship with Cuba. But why is it that it's up to us to take unilateral steps just because it may not be popular around the world? What about Cuba having respect for human rights, allowing the Red Cross to go into a Cuban prison, which they don't allow, allowing opposition parties, forget about forming. They don't allow that. How about just meeting? Meetings are broken up and these people are put in jail. How about having elections in Cuba where the only candidate for supreme leader is not just one person, and he boasts about getting 98%. Now, we're not perfect. America's not perfect. And I know we've taken heat on that. We've taken heat in Latin America. You know, when I was in the Congress, I didn't vote for the Helms-Burton Act. It's now U.S. policy. But it strikes me that human rights can be an area where there could be some immediate movement on the part of the Cuban government. And I don't say that the Pope's visit is a concession on the part of Castro. But I do say that the Cuban people will get a chance possibly to taste religious freedom. There are masses now. If the Pope's visit brings one more priest and there's a practice of religion allowed, it'll be a positive step. Now, it could be that this freedom of religion unleashes other freedoms that the Cuban people may see and may want. I hope so, because I think that it is important. 34 out of the 35 nations in our hemisphere are democracies except one. But there should be reciprocity in any relationship.
Unfortunately, with the many people up, we're taking the last question, which is here in the balcony, and I apologize.
Thank you very much. I'm Jaiche from South Korea. I'm a visiting fellow for a couple of months here to attend Harvard University Trade Union program. Personally, I'm a little bit excited to deliver my question to you. It's a great honor to me. My question is that the recent IMF bailout package for Korea will bring us some kind of impact. Either way, I mean, long-term or short-term, or negatively or positively. But just in case, the negative impact, for example, we are forecasting more than 10% unemployment rate within this year, and it is one of the turmoil, economic turmoil. Economic turmoil will directly relate to our social unrest. But we are facing with North Korea. As you know very well, North Korea is almost crucial line in terms of their poverty, in terms of political initiativeness. So just in case, we have many national priority agenda, but Korean people would not heavily place the national security agenda rather than economic agenda. Even though Korean government will push forward to have a balance of the economic agenda plus national security agenda, but I'm not for sure Korean people prefer that. So just in case North Korea would like to maximize any possibility to attack South Korea, what is your the UN's alternatives on that particular subject? That's my question. Thank you very much.
Let me tell you what the U.S. will do in the event of a challenge to South Korea by North Korea or by economic problems. We are with you. We are with South Korea. We have a strong alliance relationship. We're behind you. Also, let me say that your new president, Kim Dae-jung, he's a friend of mine. He was a former member of Congress, one of his negatives, but he is somebody that cares about human rights. We worked together on this Burma issue. I don't know where my Burma friend is. He is somebody that I think is going to be a great leader there. Now, there's an IMF package. We pushed for I think it was $10 billion to be accelerated in the IMF package. In exchange, what the IMF is demanding from countries is reform of their internal economic structures, budget balancing, structural reforms. I am confident South Korea is going to make it well. The people there are resilient, they're great workers, the economy has been strong. This is a bump, and I think South Korea will get over this bump. Let me tell you about North Korea, because I've been there 3 times, and I've been one of the few that have been there. Our policy with North Korea is working, and it was because of the threat of UN sanctions imposed on North Korea that they agreed to negotiate with the United States on restricting their stockpile of nuclear weapons to the point where now they have frozen their nuclear development. That is good for the world. We as Americans have 32,000 remains from the Korean War that need to be returned. We're now talking about that. Next week, the United States, your country, South Korea, and North Korea and China are going to talk about peace, about a new arrangement in the Korean Peninsula. There won't be an immediate agreement, but our view is that when you engage North Korea, countries that you disagree with, as we have engaged on China, and we get criticized for not enough emphasis on human rights, but we have felt that by engaging countries like China, and we discuss with China our differences, and we engage them economically, and we respectfully state our disagreements on human rights as President Clinton did, that it's better to engage than it is to isolate. But with South Korea, we're behind you. And with Kim Dae-jung, back him up. I don't know if you voted for him. I'm not going to get into that one. But he's a good man, and he's going to do well.
I'll give you a chance after if we can, but we now need to close because I'd said that at 7:15 we're closing. Before we say thank you to the ambassador, I would also like to make a bittersweet announcement. This is most likely the last forum managed by our forum director, Heather Campion, who after a decade of building the forum is actually going off to a different job now. It almost makes me emotional to talk about it. But I want to ask you to join me in saying to Heather, who I'll ask to come here, a word of thanks for what she's done for us for a decade. And for coming to Boston on a snowy evening in January during the middle of exams on a Friday night. You can see there's a lot of enthusiasm for Bill Richardson and for the job that he's done not only in Congress, but that he's now doing in the United Nations. So let's say thanks again to him and that we look forward to welcoming him back.